Good morning. Thanks very much for the invitation to come and talk with, not talk to, talk with you today. I'm looking for an interactive session. Questions as they occur to you should be shouted out vociferously, because I haven't got Twitter in front of me, I can't see it. This is the second time I've delivered this stack. The first time was 2 weeks ago at a conference in the US run by 3M. And so if you want to see the stack, it is actually at the top of my blog at philipsheldrake.com, and I'm at Sheldrake. So that's all the social creds out at you. So beautifully set up by Mr. Waddington in terms of situating social business. Stephen's brought us bang up to 2013, and now I'm going to bring us bang up to 2020. You with me? Let's have a look, see what we can do here. Here's what we do with technology. We take what we used to do in the analog world, and then we stick an E in front of it. So we went from mail to email. And it's only now, 30 years after email, that we're starting to look at playing to IT's special properties. And we're finding out that, do you know what? Email sucks. I don't do too many audience participation, put your hands up things, but literally, hands up who doesn't get enough email. Okay. So just as well, we're finally transitioning here. We had old files and old folders, and so when we went digital, guess what we did? We had files and folders. Crazy, and it's only now that we're moving towards a sort of search paradigm, as they might say on the West Coast. We went from an analog desktop, and then we made a desktop. Flipping heck, people. Really, is this the best we can do with technology? Now we've got home screen and widgets and gesture, much more intuitive. We're making the IT serve us, rather than us serve the IT. Well, you might think we are, but 10 years into social media, we've gone from tall office blocks that weren't social to tall office blocks that have a Facebook page and a Twitter handle. Really? Is that the best we can do? I don't think so. I'm an optimist. We can do more than just bolt social on. We can actually build it in. If we stopped developing all tech for the rest of the decade right now, every organization I can think of would still be struggling to work out how to best use that by the end of the decade. It's a massive chasm between the techies and the rest of us. So this is kind of like the hypothesis as far as I'm concerned. Social media are only the eggs in the social business cake. You need other ingredients and an oven and a chef, but at that point the analogy starts to break down badly. But it conveys the fact that if you say to somebody on Twitter, hey, love your Facebook page, they go, yeah, #SocBiz. No, you're just a company with a Facebook page. That's not social business, that's social media. It's so much more. A social business is not a business that uses social technologies to do what it's always done. I like to say, beware the prefix. If you did marketing and now you do social marketing, if you did PR and you now do social PR, if you did CRM but now you do social CRM, do you know what? That's kind of indicative that you're bolting on social. You're still referencing the 20th century silos, the 20th century organizational functions, but slapping a social on front. It's not where it's at. So let's see how we can break this down, see if we can build it up differently to make the best of today's tech today, rather than 2020. I don't know about you, but I'm bloody impatient. Every time I interact with a company that gets this more than others, I know it's a company I want to personally be part of. So let's see if we can get as many companies there as possible. Social is often used interchangeably in the marketing sense. So let's jump to Kotler's definition of marketing, the process by which companies create value for customers and build strong relationships in order to capture value from customers in return. That's marketing. Saying that, I do speak to a lot of practitioners who think marketing is a synonym for advertising, but there you go. That's just the world we live in. That is the process of marketing. If you don't do that in an organization, you're not going to add value, you're not going to extract value. Game over. But what happens if we abstract that a little bit? What if we talk about the process by which thingamies create value for whatsits? and build strong relationships in order to capture value from those what's-its in return. You can tell I would never make a living as an academic. I don't believe I've seen a slide that stupid from anybody in academia. Yeah. But actually, when you start replacing those words, you can start to see that this relationship of value exchange permeates everything in business. In fact, everything in organizational life, everything in society. You can just replace thingamies and whatsits with any two parties that you know have to work together. And what are they trying to do? They're trying to do the same thing as Kotler defines marketing as. They're just trying to achieve mutual value. In other words, every single individual, for each of her many roles in life, seeks to establish relationships to create value of one sort or another. It doesn't always have to be financial. It can be anywhere on Maslow's hierarchy of needs, but that's what we're all trying to do. We're social animals, for goodness sake. This social thing shouldn't be so new to us. Perhaps the very definition of sustainable relationship, and perhaps then of society itself, so long as the fabric of society doesn't break down, is when such value creation is mutual. In fact, those societies that do break down haven't got that mutuality right. So what about organizations? What do? Well, they actually are just dynamic collections of individuals. And we've spent many, many, many millions over the last decade or so investing in big IT systems to track the flow of money, bloody important. Got to find out where the money is. Track the flow of materials, bloody important. Got to get it from them, do something to it, and ship it out. We've got to track the flow of time because, well, we're all deadline-driven. If we miss the deadlines, our reputation suffers. So we track money, materials, and time, and we spend tens and hundreds of millions trying to do that for large, complex organizations. But as yet, we haven't invested in understanding the flow of influence. It's only in the last 3 or 4 years that we've been able to even think about tracking the flows of influence systematically. But what is influence? Because it's one of the most bandied around terms online at the moment. You've been influenced when you think something you wouldn't otherwise have thought or do something you wouldn't otherwise have done. That's influence. Right now, there is no scalable facility to measure that. One might say, thankfully, it's almost a dystopian vision, isn't there, if there was a computer system that knew why I chose to wear this attractive colour today, or why you decided to come here today, or do this degree course, or work for that employer. I mean, wow, influence is really complex. It's a sedimentary process that happens over many years, such that when you need to replace the TV, you know whether to go for Sony, Sharp, or Panasonic. Why do you know that? Because you're just having all these influences acting on you, interacting with your friends, your family, and adverts on telly, lest we forget. So we don't have media for media's sake, but to communicate, and we don't communicate for any other reason than to influence. And when I say that, I always mean the reciprocal as well, to influence and to be influenced. When you start looking at organizational life in that context and understanding the flows of influence, you can start dumping the 20th century language, which is what we need if we're going to tear up the rule book and start again. We don't have reputation managers. We don't have brand managers. We just have an organization that's intent on understanding how influence goes around, comes around. Because if we don't track those influences, then we can't end up in a position that's conducive to our achieving our organizational objectives. Of course, if you disagree at any point, remember to just shoot your hand up and shout up. And we know I'm moving reasonably fast. What is the intended outcome of your organization if it's not to have people important to your business's success think and behave as you'd like them to, and to ensure systematically that you're influenced by them so that you think and behave as they'd like you to? Otherwise, how are you going to respond to their needs, their desires? In other words, any collection of individuals is just an influence process. There's influence in everything an organisation does, and, just to complicate the matter, sometimes in what the organisation chooses not to do. So we arrive at this stack, as far as I'm concerned. For those public relations academics in the audience, you'll like to see the fact that it's all pivoting off the public relations excellence model, about achieving mutual understanding between stakeholders in order to build goodwill. Once you've got mutual understanding, you can then be prepared to get better at mutual influence. And once you've got mutual influence, together you can build mutual value. And to me, this stack separates social media as a channel. Literally, I've been to conferences where someone's got up and told me, there's only one kind of social, it's social selling. To which I say, you haven't got mature measurement. If you can only measure the value of social by when the cash register rings, you haven't got mature business performance management in place to understand the impact social can make 2, 3, 4 steps back from the cash register. So social selling can only try and focus immediately on the value thing. Can we sell more? Whereas social business focuses across this entire stack. And as more and more of the non-PR professionals in an organisation get this, the more they're going to start looking at this layer first and start calling on PR practitioners to grow up from the way they currently practice, as Steve unfortunately accurately conveyed. So I was quite pleased with myself to get something as simple as that. That's quite nice, isn't it? The problem is this bugger. There are 7 billion of us on this planet, and whenever you get a large number of anything combining together, you get complexity. When you get complexity, it means that odd things happen. Like, for example, you can't understand the termite mound by studying the termite. You can't understand the traffic jam by taking a course in car design and maintenance. It's a different level of things going on. And the interesting thing about this definition of complexity, the link to the academic work down here somewhere in a 2-litre font, watch if I just change that top word. See what I did there? Because actually, that's a bloody good definition for social as well. Social is effectively synonymous with the definition for complexity. And the first thing that makes me think is we've got to toss out all those rules of thumb, those simple ways of working, those maxims, those myths that permeated 20th century management thinking. We had to have simple thinking back then to try and navigate complexity because we didn't have the systems to do otherwise. Now we do. With 90% of the world's data, this is an IBM fact at the end of 2012, they said 90% of the world's data had been created in 2011 and 2012. Think about that, that's just an astonishing fact. But it's an incredible amount of digital detritus that we can machine to help us navigate complexity for the first time. Just because it's complex doesn't mean we can't think about navigating it simply. So this is a diagram I introduced in my 2011 book, where I'm asking practitioners to think, which of these influence flows are you currently focused on at the moment? And as Stephen said, they're largely focused on number 1. In fact, we're just teasing them to start focusing a little bit on number 2, how stakeholders influence each other. Systematically, can we get number 3 flowing for us? Rather than doing a once a year or twice a year piece of market research, can we do real-time listening and monitoring? Systematically being influenced. And with everything happening in the digital space, we can be constantly aware of the 3 flows between our competitors and their stakeholders. Who's doing this? Has anybody seen this in practice yet? I haven't. Why not? It's possible. Politics, funny enough, they're one of my favourite targets of politicians for the inadequate understanding of technology. But when it comes to winning votes, bloody hell, they're on this. If only they could be on it. If only they could be on it for other aspects of government policy rather than just vote winning. The 20th century organisation tries to ignore complexity, or if they're aware of it, they try and pretend that they can get away with if this, then that kind of Newtonian simplicity. The 21st century social business recognises complexity can't be made simpler, only simpler to navigate. That's a key difference between the kind of discipline that we can bring to organisations that's currently missing. So how might we define social business? Well, I like to say it involves designing the organisation around influence flows, connecting everybody involved with it, connecting all the data, information and knowledge, so that that collection of people, that organisation can work more openly, productively and profitably. And you'll see that we both recognise complexity in that definition and work out which IT services might help us navigate complexity. That's social business. That's #SocBiz, not having a Twitter handle. When you think in those terms, you start to realise that the organisation is far more than just its payroll. The idea of external comms and internal comms as separate disciplines breaks down miserably. There's no point. It's an artificial distinction. And because those influence flows change constantly, literally, they're different this afternoon to this morning, the organisation's design has to change to live up to that. Are you a social business? That's the question I often ask my clients. Knowing that actually everyone has to answer no to this question because it's a 2020 question. Do you help all the individuals associated with your organisation build worthwhile relationships with each other and others, coalescing by need and desire, knowledge and capability and shared values in order to create shared value? You'll notice that now demanding we use this social technology for self-organisation. This self-organisation appeals very much to capitalists in the room, right-wingers who want to maximise asset utilisation. It also appeals very much to left-wingers who decry command and control structures. So this is a new kind of politics possibly emerging here. And of course, shared values are at the heart of the very definition of a brand in the 21st century. So only when an organisation can start to answer that question might they start to consider themselves a social business. IMHO. Who's doing it? Interestingly, the Joint Special Operations Command is in Iraq and Afghanistan. Would you bloody believe it? Because the one thing the rest of us who've never had any military expertise think is, bloody hell, they're all very regimented, command and controlled. No, they're not. What they found when they went into these countries is that they weren't geographic land masses fighting each other. They were actually fighting a network that had dumped command and control a long time ago. And the only way to fight a network is to be a network. And we will therefore see this play out in the public and private sectors too. Some brilliant quotes here from Stan McChrystal, who was the former commander of the Joint Special Operations Command. We'd brought an industrial age force to an information age conflict. I read that as a 20th century organisation in a 21st century social business context. Dell is often held up as a poster child of people who get social, but boy did they not. At one point I had such a bad experience with Dell that when somebody labelled those kind of experiences Dell hell, I knew exactly what they were talking about. It was a miserable company to deal with. And then Michael Dell got religion, he got social back in 2006, I think, 2006. He said, this isn't good enough, we're pissing people off. And they're so proud about their progress towards a social business kind of utopia that they even issue charts like this to tell you how they're getting on. They're not there yet, but they're definitely ahead of the pack. EE, which is, I don't know if that's a brand outside of the UK. Who amalgamated to become EE? Orange and T-Mobile? Two fantastic brands merged together and decided to dump all that brand equity and try and invent it from scratch again. But there you go, I'm not a brand consultant. So EE, the first 4G operator in the UK, have tried to live up to this vision of social business. They're trying to turn social from being something we do to the way we do business. They're trying to move from social being something that's bolted on to something that's built in. And Scott Monty over at Ford, lest we get carried away in 2013, has just reminded us all that we're not at this 2020 kind of vision just yet. He's basically saying it's bloody hard. We've got the silicon, right? The IT, the technology is ready. It's the carbon units People are the problem. We can't reorganise, particularly when you've been an individual in an organisation that's been run a certain way for the last 25, 30 years. You've just got to the top of it, and we're now saying to you, could you just undermine all those ways you got to the top of the organisation just so that we can reinvent the way business works? They're finding it very difficult. I, for one, am impatient for them to retire, but they probably have 10, 15 years left in them. So how can we get the change happening earlier than the current typical white male 50-something boards of large organisations are allowing us to? We can change from the bottom up. I'm impatient, so I wanted to convey this vision in a really compelling way. And the most compelling way we thought is not to do an academic textbook. I wrote one of those in 2011. You have to be seriously into this stuff to want to read it. So instead, I decided to write a story, a piece of fiction, which in a 2.5 hour flight, coast to coast, as is happening in the US, you can read this. People get into stories because they get into the characters. They start to get under the skin of the business being covered. And when they read it, they explore aspects of complexity, 21st century definitions of brand, big data, social business. And then they can go back into their organisation and start asking really smart questions, even if they don't yet have really smart answers. And I'm delighted that Social Media Today in the US has produced this with me, which is nice in terms of getting the circulation. I've also made it free, because why would I want to put a price between where we are today and social business? I'd rather as many people get this as quickly as possible. Thank you very much for your attention.